Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the conservation planning section of the agenda, and I'm going to welcome Jeremy Seamers up to the podium here to get started with the zoology update.
Hello. It's nice to be in a meeting where I'm not in sweatpants, so it's good to see everybody. Yeah, pretty much. There's a podium here, but I don't have them on. So I want to talk a little bit about the zoology section, and then we'll have some of our partners come up and talk about specific projects. So these are folks in our zoology team who are here right now, so stand up. We don't have to say anything, but you can at least stand up. Rob, Andrea, and John. These are some of the things they work on. Yeah, come on. Yeah. And then we also have some other folks who are part of the zoology team that are either not here or not in this country right now. Tarataka, Brad, Scott, Beth, and Justin, and these are some of the things that they work on as well. And so if you would like to talk to any of these folks, they'd be more than happy to talk about their work and some of the things they focus on. So the zoology section's core functions are essentially animal conservation, ranking and mapping, inventorying different parts of Colorado to identify new populations, monitoring the condition of animal populations, and then doing some research to answer questions of conservation interest. And I'm going to go through a few of these projects real quickly. They're basically just a line and a title. There's a lot more details behind all of these, and some of them we talked about more, and some of them have already been talked about. But this is just some highlights of some of the things that we've been working on. So for inventory projects, boreal toad site inventory, the conservation easement baseline reports for City of Fort Collins, the Roaring Fork biodiversity, Roaring Fork watershed biodiversity that was just talked about, that project. And then also the Jefferson County inventory that was just talked about, which was a unique project that I did want to highlight again. We initially did this in 1993. It was one of our first county inventories. It's then been revisited in 2010 and 2011. And then now we're looking at 2021 and 2022. So it's a way to keep updating that information that we find over time. Some of the monitoring projects we've been involved in, the boreal toad breeding site monitoring, which is one of our longer term population monitoring projects. Also the Prebles Meadow jumping mouse on the Air Force Academy. The Pawnee Montane Skipper project, which we'll hear about in a little bit. Also some white nose syndrome surveillance for bats across the state. We completed a project, John Sovell doing reptile monitoring on Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site in Fort Carson. And then we're also doing some bat monitoring using NA bat protocol at Rocky Mountain National Park for the past couple of years. We've also been doing some research focusing on different aspects within our both our monitoring projects and some of our more general inventory projects as well. Some of those have been bat monitoring. So we have a few publications out about those, both some mark recapture work as well as some general ecology. And then we were also involved with some of the national publications on NA bat. Also, I wanted to highlight one of Brad Lambert's contributions to the boreal toad monitoring. There's a recent publication on climate change, and this was a global analysis looking at many different populations of amphibians across the world. And the long-term data set that he had collected on over the past 20 plus years was one of these that was providing data and evidence of climate change across amphibian populations. And then Rob also worked with some student co-authors for his Linda Hamilton conservation students that published on some of the Hops blue butterfly. So where do we want to go in the future? There's a few little topics of things that we're kind of interested in moving toward. Population estimates, estimation of rare species, continuing to look at bats that are susceptible to white nose, as well as amphibians. Bioacoustic monitoring, we've done a lot of bioacoustic monitoring with bats, but we also would like to expand that to birds and amphibians as well. Bumblebee monitoring, pollinator conservation has become important, and it's always been important, but it's becoming more visible. So we'd like to get involved more with some of that. Brad's been working with trying to figure out how to look at some of the invasive species and invasive animal species, particularly looking at bullfrog and red-eared slider. And then also disease ecology, which is becoming more and more apparent as one of the biggest threats to animal populations is a disease, so white nose syndrome as well as chytrid fungus. So now I'd like to invite up Tina Jackson from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and she'll talk a little bit more about some of the projects that we've been partnering with.
Yay, I made it. So happy to be here today and glad to see Jeremy's slides before, because I didn't put a lot of slides together about this. So there was a lot of it already talked about there. One thing that I did want to just say is, so I've been a species conservation coordinator with CPW for about 20 years now. And since day one in that position, I've worked with CNHP, because at the start I had boreal toads. And one of the first people I met was Brad and dealing with the boreal toads. And so we've had a lot of different projects that in my world have connected to CNHP, and CNHP has been very helpful in getting the work done. The most recent one that we're just finishing up, CNHP's part of the project is done. I'm the hang up at this point is our black-tailed prairie dog monitoring effort. We've been doing a lot of work with bats over the years, and then soon, hopefully, we'll be doing some work with olive-back pocket mouse. The one thing that all of these projects have had in common along the line is that they're very broad scopes and scales of this work. Most of it is either range-wide within the state or statewide because of the range of the species. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit today was our bat work and the importance of this work. So I took over the responsibility for bat conservation in the state in 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. It's been a while, pre-pandemic. And then back in 2010 or so, our focus with bat conservation shifted very dramatically, what felt like almost overnight, in that the fungus that causes white nose syndrome, or the syndrome itself, was detected in western Oklahoma. That detection was later determined to be a false positive, but it made us realize that what we were going to have to do is come up with some really good baseline information on our species before that disease made it into the state. And that's tough. These are not easy individual animals to monitor. So we started with, how do we even start? And we had some conversations internally, but pretty quickly we realized we were going to need to call in the cavalry. So fast forward a few years, and we are now one of the states that's very significantly involved in the North American Bat Monitoring Program. We had started even before North American Bat Monitoring was released as a program in developing some ways to do acoustic monitoring of our species across the state. And due to those early talks with both Jeremy and Rob, we were one of the first states to actually implement that protocol. And I think that has really helped a lot, because bat work in the West is very different than bat work in the East, where a lot of the white nose syndrome response comes from. And it's not a very easy program to implement in our state. As you know, we're a big state, and we're trying to do numerous grids across the state. We collect gigabytes of data, and there's a lot of analysis and verification and data management that goes into this program. So in this slide, way over there on the right, you can see, well, in the middle, that's an acoustic monitor setup out there in the summer. We leave those up for about a week. That very far right map shows the grids that we're covering across the state. We're at about 50 that we do under the CPW portion of the contract, and then the CNHP connections have added a number to that. And then the bottom is an acoustic analysis. And what do I do here? Okay, so this one, and this is the one that I did really want to show, because this graph is something off of the USGS website, and it gets to kind of the level of data that we're actually able to collect under this. And in a lot of ways, I like that graph because it's very misleading. That's the number of detections by species. Each color is a different species throughout the state for that year. But that isn't the number of calls. Each one of those points represents one call file out of thousands that was processed through the latest software, then manually verified by someone with a very unique set of skills. And before becoming that data to be added to the national data set, and it's helping us understand the impact of not just white nose syndrome, but other threats facing these species. So I just wanted to wrap it up with, I couldn't do the work that I do with the numerous species that I have responsibility for at CPW without the interagency agreements that we set up with CNHP across the years. So thank you.
And next we have Michael Painter from the U.S. Forest Service.
Hello, everyone. I don't have any prepared notes. I just have one slide that, do I advance on here? The forward? There it is. Okay, my one slide. So my name is Michael Painter. I am the district biologist for South Platte Ranger District, which is a part of the Pike and San Isabel National Forests and Comanche and Cimarron National Grasslands. I just wanted to share with you today information about 3 different projects that actually, I would actually round it up to 4, because one species is in 2 different projects that we have going on the Pike, San Isabel, Comanche, and Cimarron, or the PSICC. The first that's already been mentioned is the Pawnee Montane skipper. We've been working with John Sovol for since as long as I've been on the district, which, and even before that, the project began in about 2000. The Forest Service was required by a biological opinion with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to monitor population response of Pawnee Montane skipper to forest thinning and forest restoration practices that we were undertaking, which at that time was a brand new way of doing forest management, looking at historical range of variability in forest stand structure, and then modifying our mechanical treatments to mimic that kind of forest structure. And the Pawnee Montane skipper is a listed species. It's listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and it has a very, very limited range in the whole wide world. It occurs just on about 30 square miles or surrounding the South Platte River and the North Fork of the South Platte River in Jefferson and Douglas counties. And it is very closely associated with arid or xeric ponderosa pine structure. And ponderosa pine ecosystems are one of the forest ecosystems that's been severely impacted by forest fire suppression over the last 150 years. And Forest Service and other partners at Denver Water and Colorado State Forest Service were attempting to mechanically recreate those pre-fire suppression conditions. And we weren't sure what was going to happen to this butterfly. We were assuming that what we were planning to do was actually going to be a good thing, since this species has evolved in ponderosa pine forest, which is a fire-adapted ecosystem, but nobody knew. And so we started a population monitoring study with CNHP, and have been doing that population monitoring near Trumbull for every year since then. So we're at year 22 now. This will be year 22, and we do our surveys in August. In the year 2002, we were all struck with the unexpected outbreak of the Hayman fire. And the Hayman fire, combined actually with a previous fire, the Buffalo Creek fire, created stand replacing conditions on almost half of the Pawnee Montane skipper range. And so we've added additional monitoring, targeting the butterfly response to those fire conditions. And the data that we have combined in those two different types of studies have given us a lot of information about how the butterfly is responding not only to the actions of the fire, but also our mechanical treatments to try and create better habitat conditions for the butterfly. Our next group, our next species there in the center is the boreal toad, and we've been working with Brad Lambert on actually two different projects. He's been coordinating with our biologist in the San Carlos district in Chaffee County for, I'm not sure exactly how many years. I want to say it's 10 or 8 or 10 years. Which is the boreal toad there has a well-established breeding population that they've been doing a lot of research on, trying to look at ways to prevent the spread of chytrid fungus there with that population. And then the second study that we've been doing is looking at reintroducing or looking at historic locations where we might be able to do reintroductions of boreal toads in Park County. And that's on my district, on South Platte Ranger District and the South Park Ranger District. So we've been working with Brad over the last about 4 years on that project as well. And then finally, over on the very right, it's not exactly in your zoology, but it's taking information that we know about species that we've collected partly from the work in the zoology group, but also working with Lee Grinnell in your planning shop. And just this last year, worked on finishing a indigenous fish and wildlife conservation plan for 2 of our wilderness areas, Mount Evans and Lost Creek Wilderness. And wilderness areas are one of those kind of unique places that have been set aside for very good reasons, but the stipulations that come with wilderness also mean that our ability to do intentional management in wilderness areas is more complicated than it is outside of wilderness area or outside of a wilderness area. And the Forest Service over the last 3 years has been more intentionally looking at the what we can do to conserve species within wilderness areas, and that first step begins with building an indigenous species plan. So Lee has helped us a lot with that. So I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
And next online, we have Brian Milbachler from the U.S. Air Force Academy.
Good morning. Sorry I'm not attending in person, but I decided I didn't want to endure rush hour traffic from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs on a Friday afternoon. So I don't have any slides, but I just want to kind of talk through what's going on at the Academy in coordination with the Heritage Program. CNHP and the Academy have worked together for nearly 30 years on various natural resources and conservation activities on the installation. And it's been my privilege to work with scientists and students, interns, seasonals, and other staff for nearly 20 years, or over 20 years, 22 years, here as the Natural Resources Manager. And that's involved a lot of cross-pollination with various programs with CNHP, zoology, botany, vegetation ecology, and conservation planning. I don't consider CNHP to necessarily be a contractor to the installation, but more so integral part of our natural resources program and team here at the Academy in terms of how they support our implementation of our integrated natural resources management plan, our noxious weed management plan and control activities, and particularly our endangered species compliance as it relates to Preble's meadow jumping mouse, conservation and implementation of our conservation agreement with Fish and Wildlife Service, our activities and involvement in the Preble's recovery team, and more recently, our involvement in the Monument Creek Preble's site conservation team. So I'll just focus on kind of what's going on with jumping mouse. But again, we do cross over with other CNHP programs. So I've worked with Rob Shore for years and others on the Academy studying and trying to conserve Purple's metal jumping mouse. For those of you who don't know, we're going to be an integral part of the recovery strategy for the mouse, in that the Academy is home to the bulk of the population of the mouse in the Monument Creek watershed in the southern recovery population. So we've done a number of years of population and habitat monitoring and research. In fact, we've got over 25 years of continuous trapping records and habitat assessments that have been done on the installation. And all of that information has been critically important to driving some of the development and implementation of things like the Preble's Recovery Plan, compliance with our conservation agreement, and again, feeding into the newly created site conservation team that's trying to accomplish conservation at a more local level. So we're really excited about being able to take those 20 plus years of mouse data and provide that to all of those entities to achieve effective conservation, hopefully within the Monument Creek watershed area. Rob's done a lot of work on telemetry, upland fire effects, some genetic sampling, trying to utilize camera trapping to determine occupancy on the installation, and all of that good information has really supported those efforts. More recently, we're working with Lee Renault and Rob on a conservation plan update. The Academy, back when the mouse was listed, entered into a conservation agreement, which included a conservation plan for the mouse to basically expedite our compliance with Endangered Species Act, but has also put us on good footing for conservation of the mouse on the installation. But that plan's over 20 years old, and a lot has changed in the watershed over the last 20 years. So there's a need to update that plan, and we are just starting the process now of updating that to include things that weren't addressed previously, like climate change and drought and the impact of extensive development that's happened in the watershed, which has caused significant habitat loss and also caused us to go into more of a restoration mode than a protection and conservation mode that we were in previously, and also just generally addressing the issue of habitat resiliency. So we're excited about pulling together a new conservation plan to lead us for the next 5 to 10 years or longer as we coordinate our activities with Fish and Wildlife Service. Part of that project as well also includes a beaver dam analog project, where we're going to try to construct and monitor analogs on several stream reaches on the installation, and also monitor habitat utilization by prebbles and other wildlife, and look at the impact on stream stability and the ability to kind of expand the influence of beaver on the Academy and promote prebbles habitat. So thank you for your time. I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's absolutely wonderful to work with you, and also wonderful to work with you, Michael and Tina. Absolutely wonderful partnerships. Thank you, Jeremy, for Zoology team update.